Disclaimer, in no way is this video sponsored by Bungie, and I want to make it clear that I have never been paid to promote or test Marathon in any way. All opinions in this video are my own independent opinions and or analysis of community opinions. There's no hiding from the fact that Bungie's grand reveal of Marathon did not go entirely to plan, as feedback seems split, but siding mostly towards negative and skeptical side. If there's any silver lining to this troublesome reveal, it's that it caused Bungie to lift the NDA on the closed alpha in an attempt to soothe the negativity by letting the game speak for itself. And so, did it work? Well, that's what this video is all about, as we look into the Marathon Alpha, the community's first impression, and whether sentiment is shifting, as well as addressing the negative comments and the criticism of my reveal video, especially now that we've seen recent gameplay. I want to start with an important point that I think so many people are forgetting. It's too early to expect a realistic answer to the "why would I make this my main game?" or "why would I play this for 1,000 hours?" or "what's the long-term pull?" At least right now. Bungie is not expecting you to drop Destiny 2. Bungie is not expecting you to drop Tarkov or any other game you might main to play this version of Marathon's alpha forever. It's an alpha for feedback and core system testing. The alpha shows positive signs and also has plenty of things Bungie will need to fix and work on if they want a successful game. But remember to keep some perspective when making comparisons. And there's no reason to feel overly worried if you don't see this replacing your main game in its current alpha state, with us yet to see the true progression and the end game loop. Very few players could confirm the thousands of hours they later put into Destiny just a few hours into the OG Destiny 1 beta. For the sake of enjoyment, that's important to remember. Following the reveal, the biggest point of criticism from the community seemed to be less Marathon related and more generalized skepticism over Bungie, and this is what needs to be addressed first and foremost. The most liked comment on my reveal video read, "Imagine expecting people to be excited for your new game when they've seen how you treat your old game and its community." This is something I definitely agree with, and clearly something I didn't do a good enough job at expressing following the reveal, and for that, I apologize. Hardcore Destiny fans are well within their right to feel skeptical about Marathon. If they feel like their experience in Destiny in recent times has deteriorated as a result of Bungie's development on Marathon and shifting core leadership over to Marathon, then skepticism is not a bad thing to feel. And I'd argue skepticism is much better than blindly trusting or buying a product from a developer anyway. Despite this, I do think it's important to not let skepticism of others and or yourself turn to blind hate of a game you haven't fully experienced for yourself. We all know Bungie can make great games, and we all went to see great games be made for us to experience. Marathon will need feedback to succeed, and I know a lot of you guys won't want to hear that, but it's important. So try not to channel skepticism and concern over features that you don't trust Bungie with, and mold that to genuine and constructive feedback that hopefully makes their way into the full release. As for the look of the game itself, a huge piece of negative feedback we saw post-reveal was its art style and direction, with lots of people either in favor of this or flat out hating it, saying how it looks low quality or Roblox Minecraft-like. So has the alpha changed that opinion? The simple answer is yes. While the art style in general is not clearly to everyone's taste, from everything I've seen in the initial reaction, it's been wow. This looks a lot better than I thought. The art style is really clean and clear, especially within the interiors of buildings and structures. It's truly beautiful. Marathon blends realism and sci-fi really well, and the lighting plus atmosphere is super nice, especially for an alpha. With that being said, I can't sing the same praise for the exteriors. The outside does not feel as refined. The lighting isn't as good. The textures look a little plasticky or almost unfinished at times, and everything just looks faded. From personal experience, I felt this more in something like Perimeter than I did in Dire Marsh, where that one blended its elements on the outside a little bit better with the insides. This isn't necessarily helped by some of the dynamic weather on the maps either, as the foggy and rainy look only worsens the look. I'm not against the dynamic weather, it's a great idea, but some work on the exterior graphics to match the interior graphics definitely needs to be on par with this. Thankfully, this is an alpha, and I'm like 90% sure that Bungie are aware of the slightly lackluster exterior and the need for some further rendering and texturing work. I have no doubts this will be improved come the beta or full release, and would guess it's probably easier for interiors and smaller spaces to be rendered in high quality than large open areas. When giving feedback about the look of the game, whether it be in the comments or to Bungie, I think it's important that we acknowledge the difference between not liking the art style versus not liking how the game is currently rendered and textured. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. Now, let's take a moment to talk about today's sponsor, Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus. Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus may just be for you. Assembling and leading 70 plus Warhammer 40k champions from 17 factions in a fast-paced battle setting in the palm of your hand. Plus, the devs keep introducing fresh content, new game modes, features, and challenging events. The average rating in the App Store is a 4.5 stars, and Tacticus is a strategy game through and through, fully thinking out each of the moves you can make. You can download Warhammer 40k Tacticus with my link in the description of this video, and I want to say a big thank you to Tacticus for sponsoring this one. The next thing to analyze is the reaction to the actual gunplay and fighting. Now, we can compare the reveal and the alpha reaction. To no one's real surprise, Bungie have done an incredible job with the gunplay. Shooting and using the weapons feels great, and like a more weighted version of Destiny 2 PvP, which is to be expected in the switch to an extraction shooter genre, but while remaining within the same engine that Destiny uses. That's not to say it'll feel amazing right away to everyone. It won't, as it does take some initial brief adjustment, but for those who are used to the fast-paced arena shooters or Destiny's PvP, the gunplay will feel slightly slower and heavier, while Tarkov players will notice it feeling much more arcadey and faster paced. Ultimately, it's all about perspective and adjustment. I can't guarantee that everyone will love the feel of the gunplay, but I can tell you that it has that signature Bungie feel, and that, after adjustment, you'll like respect the way the more weighted feel pairs with the game and genre's slightly slower tempo. The next step after gunplay is to talk about how it interacts with the actual enemies that we fight. This was a contentious point following the reveal, partly because it's something that's actually really hard to comment on until you play it. The PvP and PvE is where I start to bring up some larger criticisms, but these come more so from a variety and frequency perspective, rather than a feel perspective. I've seen a lot of community criticism arrive for PvP fans who feel the idea Bungie sold them of a dedicated server PvP focused game isn't properly on show in the alpha, and I'd be inclined to largely agree from a frequency perspective. With only 15 other players on fairly large maps, fights with others can be infrequent at times, yet non-stop at other times. Ultimately, this is just the nature of an extraction shooter, and there will be variations in the frequency of PvP combat from game to game. But in an extraction shooter, although variation is expected, it's important that the game is set up in a way that allows the player to prioritize and choose the playstyle they prefer. If someone wants to rat in order to stay away from fights, collect their loot and quest items, and leave, that's fine. But it's equally important that the game allows for players to set up in a way that they can aim for aggressive fighting and expect more combat frequency while doing so. Thankfully, I think this is something that almost certainly will happen, and it means that hardcore PvP players do get that itch scratched. As the game matures in the coming days and following the release of the full game, the community will begin to learn and establish what the high PvP spots are, with inevitably certain maps lending themselves to more and less PvP combat. If Tarkov is anything to go by, the community will begin to understand which are the more beginner maps and which are the most endgame and PvP maps. I do think that in the early stages, a lot of alpha players and viewers are overlooking the fact that we only have 2 maps currently, with the majority of players starting and playing on the perimeter map, which seems to be the introductory map, although when you start the game it just defaults you to Dire Marsh. But Dire Marsh feels like it's emerging as the place with a slightly higher PvP volume. I completely understand and agree with concerns about the PvP and PvE balance, but I do think it's something that will almost certainly sort itself out, and I think Escape from Tarkov serves as a crowning example of this. This leads me on to a big piece of criticism that I'm seeing emerge from the Marathon Alpha so far. If the game is going to develop a pull to keep players engaged over time and make Marathon their main game, Bungie needs to ensure variety of experiences throughout. The two current maps, Perimeter and Dire Marsh, look decent and play well currently, and the PvE enemies are pretty good and challenging to fight too. But future maps and enemies need to be different for the sake of variation. Marathon needs each map to provide a notably different experience to allow players to tailor the experience to them. Whether this be maps that offer more PvP, CQB, and longer fights, interior-exterior experiences, lighter and darker atmospheres, and more. This is something Tarkov does so well across its maps, and something that will significantly increase the replayability of Marathon too. And PvE enemies play a role in this as well. Currently, the PvE enemies are fine and offer an okay challenge when you see them. There's an okay variation, but seeing these exact same enemy types on every map will only hurt the replayability, as it might make everything feel too samey. I did find it odd that there were only ticks and birds for other life on these locations. I felt like it would have been really nice to have different types of mobs in each area, but maybe that's something coming for a full release. As I mentioned in the intro, I'm not complaining that the alpha is void of all of that variation either. I wouldn't expect it to be there, but the importance of variation is vital feedback Bungie will need to take on board. They will need to listen if they want Marathon to be a replayable success. The worry lots of people have about the game having a purple patch then dying has a very real probability of happening if Bungie fails to add this replayability, and that's why I want to reiterate it so much. That's not to say Marathon doesn't need some significant improvement in certain areas though, as there are definitely things that Bungie needs to iron out as we move into future iterations of the game. Firstly, the inclusion of mouse magnetism or mouse aim assist is a divisive topic. In effort to combat controller aim assists unfairly balancing the matches, Bungie have made it easier than ever for mouse and keyboard to stay on their target, and while in principle they're trying to do a good thing, the general consensus seems to be that it's just so overtuned. I can very much see this being an issue, especially since they plan to add ranked mode. It dilutes things for mouse and keyboard players, and it's an example of dealing with the very real controller aim assist debate in simply the wrong way. The current iteration I don't believe does enough for players to express their skills, as it's just too easy to stay on target. I don't think this is a huge cause for concern in the long run, as I'm sure this is feedback that Bungie will absorb and exactly the sort of thing that an alpha is designed to catch and tune. I also have my personal gripes with modern day alphas and betas. They're not always used for proper feedback. They're more or less used for a lot of demos of the final product, and you don't see those changes come for a long time after. So here's to hoping that Bungie doesn't follow that one. There are also lots of comments about the game's progression and overall gameplay loop, as there's some concerns whether the entire point of the game is just load in, kill some bots, try to kill some players, and then leave. While that is fundamentally the point of an extraction shooter, progression through quests or contracts are significant points of engagement for players, there's some criticism about how simple and straightforward they currently seem, with just dealing damage in areas or looting boxes in specific areas, etc, etc. And there's justifiable worry about this simplicity and whether it becomes more engaging. Thankfully, the general vibe seems to be that the contracts get harder and more engaging the longer that people play. Like this tweet from iFrostbolt, who sums up a great example of that. Quote, "I had a good time with the alpha. It really starts to get crazy the more you play. The PvP fights get intense and the loops feel better. Didn't like some of the stuff that I hope gets worked on. This is a good sign, and I wouldn't expect much more progression in this alpha stage, but it's vital that Bungie continue on this path and push for more and more variation and progression as the game matures, as this is already emerging as a make or break factor for many players. This remained true in my time with the game, as not only contracts got harder and more nuanced, but my base traits became so much better that it felt nicer to play the more time I committed to it. Passive traits like heat cooldown and backpack space upgrades felt really nice. Speaking of which, there are two other systems, vital to extraction shooters, that have received some criticism from players in the Marathon Alpha. These being the stamina and heat bar and the looting UI. Starting with the stamina, while I'm not expecting super fluid fast gameplay like Destiny, I do feel that some movement features like sliding take a little bit too much of your stamina bar at base. I'm aware there are upgrades and items and consumables that can be used to make this feel a lot better, but at base I did find myself overheating and unable to move a little more than normal. But there's a good chance this will just require some adjustment. adjustment. As for the looting, once again, maybe there's just an adjustment period needed, but I didn't find the looting experience to be quite right yet. Everything looks quite similar, and aside from cash values, understanding what I have at its value wasn't as easy as in other games like Tarkov. I'm sure with more knowledge of the game this will be easier, but I do think Bungie could work on the UI here quite a bit. Finally, I want to address some negative comments in my original Marathon showcase video. Since there seemed to be a general feeling of discontent over the game's genre and its lack of narrative relationship to the original Marathon series, there were plenty of comments like, make a niche game, get a niche audience. The art style isn't going to kill the game. Its only game mode is a full loot PvP extraction shooter with no single player story mode and no proximity chat. This is a really hard point to address. Extraction shooters are traditionally niche and not for everyone. And while Marathon is more welcoming than other examples, the genre is still far from what Halo or Destiny lovers are used to. And I'm sorry to those people who feel let down by Bungie on this front, but please try to critique the game for what Bungie aimed for it to be, and not for what it was never meant to be. Bungie have never mentioned that the game will have a single player narrative story element, but I understand there are still some players who have a sour taste in their mouths over Marathon's link to the original title. Comments like, this is based on a well-established IP with 3 games worth of lore, with its last entry being 30 years ago. This is like if we got Doom 2016 still being the sequel of Doom 64, only for it to come out with the art look like Jet Set Radio Future and gameplay being Fortnite. In terms of the story of Marathon, there will be a massive amount of players either not interested or confused, but I can tell you, Bungie has adapted the tale of being a runner aboard ships into being a runner aboard different planets. You still have your world factions from the original, they're very forward facing too, but the story gets peeled back in layers as you complete contracts for each faction and decrypt messages. There's often a longing for a story first experience from Bungie, one filled with long cutscenes and acts, but OG Marathon wasn't like this either. It was a maze to navigate the game, it was puzzly, it gave you lore through data pads, so I'm not really sure why this version isn't enough. I almost wonder if these comments are from Destiny fans who want Bungie to make a fun story game, then get right back to work on Daddy Destiny as a full studio. But then I see these comments from a wider audience and I do some self-reflecting. And so in my self-reflection, I start to wonder if there's a large amount of players who are wowed by the visuals, the atmosphere. Maybe some of them are OG Marathon players and they want that different package than what we got here. The current version of Marathon's story will be solved by the community who take the time to fulfill contracts, interact with the world's secrets, and really live within it. I have an issue with how Bungie has handled the story in Destiny since it used to have a looser grip on your experience. You could play the game without having to stand still and watch characters talk to each other while they were standing still and pretending you weren't there. Destiny used to have moments where the world would let itself tell the story, and it was up to the player to dig for more. It challenged you to learn, and I think Marathon aims to do something similar, at least in my brief time of playing it. For almost 2 years, we have known that Marathon is not a sequel to the OG game. Bungie have made this clear. I hope OGs don't find themselves too offended by this and only see this as a way to explore a classic game in a new universe. Apex Legends and Titanfall had a somewhat similar situation, and both games are well loved for it. Bungie has a lot of work to do between now and the game's full release in September, but with proper constructive feedback, a little bit of time, and another beta, I'm confident Bungie can show their magic once again. At least, I hope so. Because at the end of the day, who doesn't want a fun game to play? I want to say a big thank you to Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus for sponsoring today's video.